Hello and welcome to Rights and Recourse, a program that tackles constitutional, human rights and legal issues, bringing you information and analysis. My name is Dumile Matez. Remember, you can also be part of our discussion today by calling our studio line on 011 714 5497 or 5498, or tweet us at Rights and Recourse. Alternatively, email your thoughts to rightsandrecourse@sabc.co.za. Many people in South Africa believe that the Office of the Tax Ombud applies an inadequate bandage to a very large wound by dealing with service and administrative issues that could be dealt with by the South African Revenue Services itself. Ombuds in other spheres have clout and the required legislative powers to deal effectively with complaints. It seems that it will be seen whether the powers of the Tax Ombud will be amplified in order to have some teeth. Today on Rights and Recourse, we take a look at the Office of the Tax Ombud and its relevance in a country whose economy is hardly growing and its citizens need every cent, especially the refunds from the South African Revenue Services. But first, let's have a look at this insert.
The annual tax season symbolizes the most important covenant between a public institution and the South African government and its people. For more than 14,000 men and women at SARS, the tax season is about living the principles, values and ideals where we give excellent service to the taxpayer. For the next 6 months, we pledge to provide you, the taxpayers in your millions, with the best service to make it easier for them to meet their tax obligations and responsibilities.
Well, to discuss today's topic, we are joined in the studio by Advocate Eric Mkawane, Chief Executive Officer of the Office of the Tax Ombud, Advocate Stephanie Fick, Head of Legal Affairs at the organization Undoing Tax Abuse, simply known as OUTA. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to Rights and Recourse.
Good afternoon.
Mr. Mkawane, for the benefit of those who never saw our first engagement on this issue, could you briefly just state to us what is the mandate and role of the Tax Ombud's office?
The Tax Ombud's role is simply to try address complaints that are received from taxpayers, and these complaints must be relating to service issues, procedural issues or administrative issues. That covers all taxes that are administered by the Commissioner, that including customs and excise. So it's just not tax, but all taxes, all acts that are administered by the Commissioner.
This also includes VAT?
It includes VAT, customs and excise, income tax. It includes skills development levy. I can go, the list is wide. Estate duty, it's about 28 all in all the acts administered by the Commission.
There is a view, Mr. Mkawane, correct me if I'm wrong, and Stephanie will help me here. There's a view that the mandate of the Tax Ombudsman is very narrow. It should include issues like the credibility of the organization and issues that are done outside of the sphere of just looking at complaints from taxpayers about the refunds and people who are looking for VAT.
Look, I think if you look at other ombuds in other jurisdictions, ours is modest. The mandate is modest. If I give you an example, in Canada, they only look at service, only service issue. So we have to look. We can look at procedural issues. We can look at whether SARS followed the right processes and procedures, and we do pronounce on such. And I could give examples. Where SARS, for example, before it can take a taxpayer's money from the bank account, it has to follow certain processes and procedures. And if it doesn't, we can step in. Whereas in other jurisdictions, they don't have that luxury. And the Americans, slightly different. In Australia, you have a completely different setup. So for what we have currently, it's even better than where this legislation comes from, which is Canada. So I'm not saying that it should be the yardstick. I'm just simply giving examples. But it's not as narrow as maybe many people can think or would suggest. It is wider. And for that matter, Since January this year, in fact, following the proposals we made, we are able to investigate systemic issues.
Within SARS?
Within SARS. So we go deeper.
These are the issues I refer to as the credibility of the organization.
Well, they may well. I mean, our office is set up to try to make sure that the tax system is credible. You know, if you have somewhere to go to, it sort of gives, you know, that credibility. You know, if you have a complaint against an institution like SARS, some fear SARS, you know, and they know, once they know that they can approach the Office of the Tax Ombud, it gives them a bit of comfort, because we can stand in between, be neutral, and assist the taxpayer where we need to. And we can call SARS and tell SARS, look, you've done wrong here. You should not have done that. And in instances where we are able to, we can even say, well, you need to ask for an apology or give an apology to.
Stephanie, is that the experience of the ordinary man in the street, that for instance, I said the mandate of the Tax Ombud's office is very narrow?
I think the problem with the people on the ground has got a problem with tax in the general sense, and everyone, we all have to pay the tax, and that's is normally the problem. I think this is a step in the right direction. We don't live in a perfect world, and I firmly believe it's really a step in the right direction. That the people on the ground, because this is the people we're talking about, is that they do now have a tax ombudsman to go to, and it's a work in progress. I believe. I believe that you recently have a case where you are now you are obliged to investigate these things, so your powers are also increasing. And I firmly believe it's a step in the right direction. That's what the people on the ground needs.
If that's the case, Mr. Mkawane, how does the office act independently? We have seen the problems around IPERT and the police and the police minister. And how can this office act independently when its funding is appropriated by Parliament through SARS?
Well, you see, the issue of funding has always been a problem. From the onset, when we started, remember the legislation was passed, and you know we stepped into our roles. So we looked at the legislation. We were not satisfied, because initially the legislation stipulated the funding shall come from SARS. So we said, this is not appropriate. It does not give that kind of independence that the office should have. So we made a proposal. We report to the minister. We are accountable to the minister. So at the very least, it should be the minister determining the budget of the office. And we were successful.
Don't you think it should be Parliament?
Well, in terms of the setup of the office, like we said, and I like the idea that, you know, or the comment made that it's work in progress. We are continuing to try to refine the legislation, so that, you know, it should not be a cut and paste from another jurisdiction. We should look at our own dynamics. And in here, the moment you smell lack of independence, nobody's going to have, credibility in that institution. And we're trying to avoid that. So we eliminated the issue of funding. So the funding is determined by Treasury. I mean, Treasury is the one that it's allocating all the funding throughout the country anyway. So even if you say Parliament, but at the end of the day, it's Treasury allocating the funds. So we've eliminated SARS in the process. So we no longer funded from the budget of SARS, but through the ministers determining the budget.
Stephanie, one would have expected that, like in the case of the public protector, that this office would identify malfeasance, not by being told by somebody else, by me writing to them and say, there's malfeasance somewhere in this organization. Without a complaint, they see what is happening, and they should be investigating that without somebody saying, well, I see something wrong there. Don't you think so?
What I understand their job if you want to break it down to be, is to be independent. Because one has to consider they are there to listen to complaints, investigate the complaints, be independent. In other words, it's their organisation that not necessarily will take the stance against SARS, and in circumstances need to work with SARS in order to rectify a problem. In other words, in my respectful submission, it's about being independent. And that if it's an independent body and that they will establish their independence, that they will then be able to investigate and see and do something about the problems you've just identified.
Yes, you can go ahead.
If I may just add, we're not only strictly concerned about complaints. It's before January this year, before the legislation was changed, we are restricted to the complaints, only complaints. So if taxpayer A comes and complains, we will look at that complaint and resolve it. Now, our mandate says we can initiate an investigation regardless of a complaint. So I may be having a braai somewhere and somebody tells me that, you know what, this is what SARS has done. And then I get to hear more about those kind of things. We are able to initiate that kind of investigation without a complaint. And viewers must be well informed about this. Some people are afraid to complain because they fear that if they complain, they may be victimized. So they may just give us information. We may just follow the information. We can initiate an investigation on that basis. And we can come up with a recommendation to SARS. Here's an issue. This is what is causing that issue. Now, this is how you can resolve the issue, and then give it to SARS and the minister. And obviously, we report such things in our annual report to Parliament.
I will come back to this issue. If you'd like to join us in today's discussion, please remember we are talking about the Office of the Ombud, Tax Ombud. We're not talking about refunds and elderly, but in the mix, we will be talking about refunds. But if you'd like to call us, you can call us on 011-714 5497 or 5498, or tweet us at Rights and Recourse. Alternatively, you can email your thoughts to rightsandrecourse@sabc.co.za. Stay with us. Welcome back to Rights and Recourse as we discuss the Office of the Tax Ombud with Mr. Eric Mkawane and Stephanie Fick from OUTA. The question is, Mr. Mkawane, there is another concern that the decisions of the Office of the Ombud are not binding, either to SARS and the client. Of what assistance is the office then?
This has been a thorny issue. Everywhere you go, people are asking such questions. Now, this is the way the legislation was drafted before. It stated that the recommendations of the Tax Ombud are not binding to the taxpayer or to SARS. It stopped there. Now, in effect, what it meant that you could make a recommendation and nothing would happen. If SARS kept quiet, we'll only report that in the annual report, probably, and this and that. But we try to improve the legislation as well. And we made a proposal. At the very least, there must be an obligation on SARS to come back and say, we don't agree with you, and state the reasons for doing so. Now, this has been changed, and also from January this year, SARS cannot just simply keep quiet and not respond. There's an obligation to state, we do not agree with your recommendations, and state exactly the reasons why. And not only that, but it must be done within 30 days of receiving the recommendation. And I must just say, so far, SARS has not really gone, we have not gone, SARS has not really neglected to implement our recommendations. Where there are difficulties, we have engaged each other in that respect, and we found a solution, for the on how to resolve the taxpayer's complaint. So, but the powers then, in fact, when you talk about binding legislation, it brings in all sort of complications in the legal process. You know, we are not a court of law. We are in there to try to assist the taxpayer in a very cost-effective manner. So the moment you bring in all those binding powers, you're bringing all these legalese and all these sort of complications. However, SARS cannot just simply ignore, because we report our activities. Where SARS fails to implement our recommendations, we report it to Parliament. And Parliament, as you know, is it's supposed to do its work and take these organizations to account. Can call on SARS to explain itself why it's not implementing the recommendations by the Tax Ombud. So it's not just simply they're not binding, it ends there. There's an obligation on SARS to respond, and also SARS can be brought to account. So the Portfolio Committee on Finance can call on SARS, and in fact, where we experience difficulties, that's where you will find us. We are going to simply write to the Portfolio Committee and say, this is what we're doing, SARS is not responding.
Your SARS has ignored the Portfolio Committee before.
Well, that's a different debate. We talk about what the Portfolio Committee is supposed to do and the powers. We can give the Ombud powers if people are not going to use those powers. It will also be
recently there's been a flood of complaints around refunds from SARS, and I thought the Tax Ombud announced it was going to investigate the delay in the refunds.
Yes.
What progress have been made?
Well, we're right at the end of the process, and within a few, maybe a week, 2 weeks, that process is going to be finalized. We've engaged stakeholders. We've engaged, there are people who lodged formal complaints in that respect. We have done an analysis on the complaints that we received from taxpayers. We wrote to SARS. We've given them our provisional report that happened earlier in the month, and they had until the 24th of this month to provide a response. They've given us a response. We are considering that. So within a matter of days, we will be able to finalize that report.
Stephanie, recently the Mail and Guardian reported that SARS is manipulating its books so it can report a more favorable revenue collection figure. How true is this? And this is not something the Office of the Ombuds should be. Is this not something the Office should be investigating?
Well, part of the investigation. In fact, let me just explain what happens in that process. When we asked for approval to institute this investigation, by the way, that has to be done through the minister. So the minister must.
Do you have to ask for approval?
We have to ask for approval, unfortunately. Like I said, it's work in progress. We are refining. We keep making proposals for legislative changes. This may be one of them. I don't want to preempt that, but it's one of them. But we have to do it. We have to get the minister's approval when we initiate an investigation. So we're looking into the undue delays in the finalization of refunds or in the payout of refunds. So deliberate, it's a different issue. So, but whether that is actually happening, it's also something that we could consider from our side. But let's look at what the report says at the end of the day, and then we can take the debate further. But this is something that may well fall within, issues like this do fall within the mandate of the Office of the Tax Ombud, because of the improvement in the mandate that we had. And like I said, from January this year.
Let me hear a view from Stephanie around this issue, because this is a very serious issue. There are many people, I've spoken to tax practitioners before this program, and many of them point to the fact that SARS keeps on making up the rules as they go along.
If I may, one has to congratulate a body like the Tax Ombudsman. They're trying, and although they may not have the big teeth at the moment, but the general problem is accountability. And can one look at the Ombudsman necessarily to say, but here is all the accountability? SARS as a whole needs to be accountable. And the accountability comes from higher up. And that before one looks at independent bodies that's supposed to assist, a body like the Tax Ombud cannot be the rule. It should be, the government needs to hold SARS responsible on behalf of the people.
A body like the Tax Ombuds office cannot be a rule, but it must be an exception.
It should be an exception. It should be an exception. It should be a nice to have, not a necessity, because SARS is not doing their job. SARS is supposed to do their job.
We never got to the idea behind why the Office of the Tax Ombud was instituted, but I want to ask this question. There's been a great deal of reports of illicit funds leaving the shores of South Africa, but the people who are inconvenienced by delays and refunds are ordinary South Africans who need refunds to augment their income to help pay off debt. Why this discrepancy? Money has been allowed to leave the country.
Well, that is not within the mandate of the Ombud. It may... those powers lie elsewhere. I mean, you have the Reserve Bank, you have the Public Protector. Those are some of the offices that you could be looking at for such issues. I mean, there are regulations. You can't take the money out of the country without following the right regulations. It cannot be the Ombud's job to look at that. We look at issues between the taxpayer and SARS, and where there are complaints against SARS. So sometimes we do, people tend to raise issues with our office, issues that are outside our mandate, and they expect us to look at that. I mean, you do find political parties, writing to the Ombud and say, well, there's this issue, please look at it. Yes, there may be issues that fall within our mandate, which we'll do, but if there are issues that fall outside our mandate, yes, they need to go elsewhere.
Stephanie, I think if we are going to have an office of the Tax Ombud, that office should look at everything around the South African Revenue Services and not only say, no, we're looking at this, we're not looking at that. Because this, for me, is a malfeasance that needs to be looked at. Look,
illicit flows. I mean, it's the revenue authority is supposed to be looking at that. We can't go in and say you are doing X or you're not doing X. It's outside our mandate. So remember, we are a statutory body. We give the mandate by the statute. So if people feel that that our mandate should be a lot wider, they must participate in the debate and make proposals for beefing up the mandate of the Tax Ombud. So there may be some things that we don't see ourselves, but I would really appreciate people saying, here's an idea. Why can't we increase the mandate in this way or in that way? And when we wrote to Treasury last time when we initiated these proposals, we indicated what exactly should be contained in that. But like I said, it's work in progress. As we work, we realize there are certain shortcomings, and as we see those shortcomings, we'll make the proposals for legislative amendments. And every person in this country has a right to make a contribution in that respect, because we want a better tax administration system. So it should not be left to the Ombud to look at. Organizations like OTA should make a contribution. So when there are such debates, there will first be a bill. And when that bill is passed, people should read and look at it and make proposals for changes or better mandate.
Judge Dennis Davis, who was chairing the tax committee, says this about SARS, and I quote, that the biggest challenge facing South Africa today is an erosion of the integrity of the South African Revenue Services. Is that SARS has no capability of actually dealing with the multinational corporation and the capital that seeks to evade tax. Isn't that what this office should be looking at? That there should be no people who avoid paying tax when they can, especially these big conglomerates and that are taking money out of the country. I'm sorry to be belaboring the point of illicit outflows.
Well, it's a very important question, but where does that lie? Does that lie with the Ombud? At this stage, not. The Ombud, what we can do what we can do, if we identify anything that looks like it's systemic in nature, that it's got a potential to affect many people, you know, negatively, and we can look at such things. But the issue of capability, if SARS standards drop, for example, when we talk about service, when we talk about issues of administration, we can make recommendations. If we identify such from the issues that we pick up from our work, we can comment on that. We can say maybe the standard of service has dropped. I mean, I'll give an example. The National Taxpayer Advocate in the US, in her annual report, she has indicated the IRS standards have dropped. The service standards have dropped. It's based on the work that has come through, and they identified, you know, the service is no longer the same. We can comment on those.
Should this issue of the refunds not indicate that the standard levels have dropped?
If that is the case, the report can indicate the reason is because people in SARS are not longer adhering to the service standards that they committed themselves to. We can indicate such things. So if we identify that people are not, I mean, there are a lot of complaints relating to service, we can package that and say, this is what we identified in the course of doing our work. Service levels have dropped, either because of resources or lack of capacity and the like. SARS, please address that. But so far, we're not getting any wind or indication that there are problems with service-related issues, or maybe those. I mean, I'm sure Judge Dennis Davis, as what is pointed out, we must look at that and see whether we can play a role in.
The other question, Stephanie, you can come in here. There is a report that appeared in the City Press that read, it emerged that the South African Revenue Services paid the controversial Gupta family a refund, a VAT refund, of more than 70 million rand after employees objected that the refund paid into an overseas bank account or lawyer's trust account should not be paid. The commissioner intervened on behalf of the Guptas, even when there was legal advice from senior counsel and tax experts that this should not be done. The question, was this a legal issue? Is this legal? Can this happen?
Look, it's very difficult to comment on reports in the newspapers, especially where it mentions names and the like. I'm sure there could be processes and procedures that may be followed. This is something that if anybody has a complaint about, could either go to the public protector and see whether that issue can be investigated or not, but not so much with the Office of the Tax Ombud in that regard. So we can't really comment on just issues that are raised.
I think, Stephanie, please help me here. I think Mr. Mkawane is trying very hard to explain to us that the Tax Ombud's office is not a Chapter 9 institution. Is that what you're trying to say? It doesn't have the same powers as the public protector. Therefore, the office is constrained.
Yes, that is correct. So there are certain issues that, I mean, like I said, we limited to service, procedural, or administrative issues. So issues of abuse, issues of how can I put it? You know, the various other issues that are outside that, we cannot look at. We can just simply say, well, you know, perhaps this is where you can go as a taxpayer. And taxpayers do approach us, by the way, for various issues, even those that are outside our mandate. The best we can do to them is that this does not fall within our mandate. Please try the public protector, for example.
Well, if you'd like to join us in today's discussion, you can call us on 011 714 5497 or 5498, or tweet us at Rights and Recourse. Alternatively, you can email your thoughts to rightsandrecourse@sabc.co.za. When we come back, we'll take a look at this issue of tax regarding the expatriate South Africans who are living outside of South Africa. Don't go away. Stay with us.
We call on all South Africans to play their part, to do what they have to do, to pay unto Caesar that which is due unto Caesar. But fortunately, because we are a democracy, Caesar no longer lives at the expense of society. With our people's taxes, we pay back unto the people through the fiscus, so that there are roads, there is electricity, to support our economic infrastructure, to pay for our social infrastructure, so that there are social income grants, so that we can continue to support free basic education, so that we can continue to support primary health care. And with the passage of time, to support the national health insurance. All of our actions put together will assist the South African economy to recover.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, pay unto Caesar that which belongs to Caesar. Is it simple as that, Stephanie?
I think that is the problem that civil society has today. If one listens to all the allegations with regards to state capture, and one listens to all the allegations out there, and you have a minister standing up, please pay your taxes, and then you have a civil society asking, but where is the tax going? Now, it's not a question of, yes, pay Caesar what he's supposed to pay. You need to pay Caesar what you owe Caesar. But then Caesar needs to do with the tax what he's supposed to do with the tax. And that's the question. I extend my hand to the Tax Ombudsman. We need to change that. It's all about, in today's society, about accountability. And that there's no accountability, and that's why there's these questions.
That's a problem, Mr. Mkawane, that, you know, if one were to use the analogy the minister was, the biblical analogy the minister was using, some of the tax collectors in the Bible did not pay the money back to Rome. They didn't send the money back to Rome. They did not take money back to Rome. And that is what is happening today.
Well, you see, in a lot of ways, I think it should concern everyone else in the country. Yes, taxes are painful to pay. It's not easy. So when people have to pay, they may find ways of trying to not to pay. Some people go on to evasion issues, some people go on to avoidance issues. Evasion being illegal, avoidance being legal. But now, yes, we have come across a few requests from the public out there saying, no, why must I pay taxes? Guess what? It comes to us and we say, well, you still need to pay tax, you know, because tax is an obligation, you know, set. Now, use the other means to, you know, to raise issues of accountability, but you can't withhold taxes at this stage. We know where we come from. You know, during the apartheid days, and you know, there was a tax revolt. Obviously, people say we can't pay we can't pay tax to an illegitimate government. Now we have a legitimate government. We can't go back there. And issues of accountability, yes, it does have an impact on people who are really collecting the taxes, people who are trying to build this tax administration system. So I think accountability issues need to come from elsewhere, or need to be taken elsewhere, but obviously not the Ombud.
There's an interesting quote that I came across during my research. Economist David Ruet said and I quote, "The South African government with its new budget does not understand that they need wealth creators. Instead, it continues to increase the burden of a bloated state on a dwindling number of wealthy taxpayers, and this could lead to a revolt." Is this what you're getting, Stephanie, amongst people, many people?
I do think that there's a lot of people that is calling for this tax revolt. Whether that is practically possible is a total different story, and we can talk about tax revolt and about the practicality of a tax revolt. But I think one needs to step back and just listen to the people and to civil society as a whole. I don't think it's ever been about I refuse to pay my taxes. It's about if I pay my taxes.
What is happening to my taxes?
What is happening to... There is an agreement between government and their taxpayers. And that, yes, I will pay my tax. But then what about your agreement to look after me, to put it simply? And that has... I don't think that is there anymore.
Well, really, I can't go any further. This debate belongs elsewhere. And when it comes to the Ombud, of course, we being a statutory body, we can only restrict ourselves to what the statute is saying, what we can do in that regard. But unfortunately, these issues do arise, and as I said, we've received, some people saying complaints, and all we can do is to say, well, you still are obliged to pay tax. The legislation says you should do so. If you have an issue, you can address it elsewhere. If you're concerned the money is not being utilized properly, go to the public protector, and that's where the issue can be taken to.
I thought the Tax Ombud's office is there to look at the credibility of the institution.
It is there to assess the credibility of the institution. Remember, the institution that we have oversight on, its role is to simply collect the tax. That's all it does. It cannot also deal with this kind of issues. These issues belong elsewhere. I'm sure the commissioner will tell you exactly that, look, my duty is to collect taxes, and what happens with that money once it's allocated, it's something else. The accountability belongs elsewhere. So we limit ourselves. Our subject of scrutiny is SARS and nothing else. It's not parliament, it's not government. We can't comment on government issues. But we can only say we are the Tax Ombud. We will deal with tax complaints against us.
But Mr. Mkawane, the example I gave earlier on the report that came out in the city press a couple of weeks ago around the 70 million rand refund, VAT refund.
Yes.
For me, it is done by SARS, and it says very clearly that some people who are in the know within SARS said it can't be done. It can't be paid to a foreign bank. Therefore, you have oversight over SARS, and that's my position is you can't just say reports are reports. You've got to give an undertaking to investigate it.
Well, look, it's an issue that, well crafted, we possibly could fall within our mandate, but we need to have somebody give us those facts, for example, and then perhaps we can look at it and how it's crafted. We have not, as an office, said to ourselves, this is an issue we must just simply, start looking at and the like. But we do not know the extent. We have not gone in there to just check what is it that happened. So perhaps it's something that we could look at. We don't know at this stage. But you, as a member of public, you raise an issue, it concerns a taxpayer and SARS, another taxpayer and SARS. You may raise an issue. As to what we do with it, it may just stay in the office, because we can't come and tell you about another taxpayer's affairs. There's an issue of confidentiality. We must be very careful when we speak about the specifics. We can only deal with those two parties, SARS and the taxpayer. We cannot address it in the media, for example.
The statement I attributed to Judge Dennis Davis earlier has caused a big rift between himself and SARS. And I thought this is an area when SARS attacked the person of Judge Dennis Davis. And I thought an organization like yours, the Tax Ombud's office, should say to SARS, no, hold your horses. Look at these issues that are raised by Judge Dennis Davis, who is actually chairing a tax committee that's looking at how legislation can be improved.
Well, maybe we should just rephrase that. Not necessarily the Ombud. Judge Dennis Davis was not appointed by the Ombud, not appointed by SARS, appointed by the minister. And I suppose that issue could be addressed between those parties and not necessarily the Ombud outside. We can only comment when it relates to mostly our mandate. So if the service is so bad and it's been caused simply because of people resigning and, things happening there within SARS that are really unacceptable, I must say, we will point out if we're to come across that kind of information.
Did you do that with this rogue units thing?
We did not. It did not concern us. It had nothing to do with.
In what way does it not concern? It has to do with the credibility of the organization, an organization that all of us have to look at. It takes our money. We've got to have faith in this organization.
Look, the debates about the rogue unit, did they have anything to do with the Office of the Tax Ombud, the mandate of the office? It had nothing. Credibility, maybe credibility in other instances, whether is this effective enough? Is this, credibility in other sense, apart from what falls within our mandate? So we can only confine ourselves. I mean, we don't want to overreach or overstep our mark. We want to limit ourselves to exactly what the mandate says. So if we say anything outside that, obviously, they'll say we are overreaching ourselves. So we really want to limit ourselves to exactly what is contained in the mandate. We may have our personal ideas or opinions, but that do not necessarily mean that we should bring that into our mandate. If it's not in our mandate.
Stephanie, for years now, OUTA has received calls from various people, despite the fact that OUTA has been fighting the e-tolls. OUTA has changed its name to be the organization just against tax abuse, something like that. What are the things that is OUTA fighting about in this respect?
OUTA is in summary about holding government accountable. So of late we were quite busy with laying criminal charges with the police. There's certain people in the news that said, but if there's no criminal charges, we can't do anything about it. We've given them the criminal charges to take these people to court and hold them accountable. At this point in time, one has a bit of a problem. We have a problem with the fact that the police are not involved, and the NPA hopefully will become involved. But we do believe that by laying these complaints and going after the transgressors, well, we need to build a new South Africa. And those complaints will come into play when there's people in charge that wants to do something.
Mr. Mkhwanazi, I don't want to belabor the point, but a growing number of people are weighing in into this discussion, even including the Tax Ombud. Judge Bernard Ngwebe, who recently cautioned government that taxpayers' concerns about the unethical conduct of the administration of their money could generate a reaction to scale back payments of taxes, similar to the concerns raised by Judge Dennis Davis.
Yes, indeed. That's, by the way, that's a personal opinion. Of course, Judge is right. There are certain things that undermine that credibility, but as to what we can do as an office, we are limited. He's made his comment, and it's great, and it's true. We begin to see people say, well, but why must I pay tax? If I see all these things, if I see... But as to whether the office itself can do something about, there's really a limit as to what we can really do. We are limited. With statutory body, the line is crossed. You cannot cross that line. It's drawn there. You cannot cross it. So we simply can still confine our activities to what the mandate says we should do.
So in other words, I was right that the mandate is very narrow.
Well, it's narrow. Remember, it's narrow in the sense that because some of these issues don't necessarily involve a taxpayer and SARS. And, in fact, they even fall outside SARS itself. How the money is utilized outside. SARS collects the money, brings it to the fiscus, and the fiscus distributes, and, wherever it goes, that money, if it's abused, well, it's not so much SARS you should be looking at. It is those people who are abusing the taxes that has been collected.
Are you aware of these calls for a tax revolt as the Office of the Ombud?
Well, I said earlier that we've received, one or two people as complaints say, from now on I'm not going to pay tax. So that's all we can hear, apart from what we read in the papers. I mean, OTA should be receiving much of that. But we do come across individuals who are saying they are not going to pay tax simply because see how their money is being used. But if somebody approaches us, we tell them, look, at the end of the day, the obligation is still on you. Well, if you don't pay, you'll face your own consequences. And if you want to take government on or anybody take them, bring in issues of accountability, please go to the right platform.
Stephanie, the South African Expatriate Tax Petition Group was founded to advance the interests of the South African expatriates earning income outside of South Africa and who might become liable under new legislation to pay more taxes. The group will focus on informing expatriates on developments in the promulgation of this legislation, the legislation that says if you have been taxed 25% instead of 45% in London, we will want the difference to be paid into South Africa. Do you think that's right?
Well,
I think let's give Stephanie a chance to answer that question first.
Before, I think I don't think it's an easy answer. I think just from the top of my head, no. I think one needs to move back a bit. Let's fix what we have first before moving onto new grounds. And I want to add to that I hope that if that type of legislation trying to target people living in London or whatever, we are also looking at legislation where if people wants to take money out of South Africa, that they are either stopped for doing that. If it's money that's supposed to remain behind in South Africa, it's money that comes from South Africans, that the type of legislation one talks about, and in this sense, will apply to everyone. And one has to be extremely careful to isolate certain members of community.
So, Kawane, we have about 7 million people drawing social grants, and that tells you it's a big number of people who are not paying tax. And now, is government trying to get more tax from expatriates to make up for the shortfall?
I thought the figure of grants is 17 million, not 7.
Oh, not 7. Probably they could be around there. There are many people who are receiving grants.
Yes. Well, somehow, in one way or another, those people are paying tax. It may not be direct.
They're paying indirect taxes.
Indirect tax.
Minuscule.
Your VAT, and as you do some purchases, there's VAT. So they do pay tax in that regard. But coming to this issue, whether an issue is fair or not, honestly, I really can't comment on that. It's a difficult thing. I mean, you would say even the rate at which people, that people are paying tax, would it be fair? Is it not fair? You know, we can't comment on that, really. At the end of the day, we need taxes to function. Now, there has to be creative ways, and even more creative ways.
You reckon this issue of taxing the expat rates is a creative way?
Well, look, it may be a creative way. It may be a way to, I mean, some instance, for example, those who earn more than 1.5 million, I mean, have to pay at the rate of 45% for an amount beyond 1.5. The question, you know, anybody asks is this fair and the like, you can't answer that. You know, I mean, that's a tax policy, and let's leave it to the policy makers.
Mr. Mkhwanazi and Stephanie, thank you very much. We will continue this discussion at some time or another, like we did last year. We can't discuss everything here in the studio. Facebook users started explaining the new tax system in South Africa in practical terms, comparing it to 10 men with various incomes drinking together in a bar. It spells out one danger: the rich might leave the party. Here is how the analogy goes. The South African tax system, suppose that every evening 10 men go out for a beer and a bill for all 10 comes to 100 rand. If they paid their bill the way we pay our taxes, it would go something like this. The first 4 men, the poorest, will pay nothing. The 5th would pay 1 rand. The 6th would pay 3 rand. The 7th would pay 7 rand. The 8th would pay 12 rand. The 9th would pay 18 rand. The 10th, the richest, would pay 59 rand. So that's what they decided to do. And this is how South African taxes are divided, and that's how. Next time, when we meet again here on Rights and Recourse, discussing this matter, we'll continue this story and tell you more about the final part of the story, which is very interesting, because the 10th man, the richest man, left the party, and the other couldn't pay for their drinks. This has been Rights and Recourse. This program is repeated on Monday morning at 5 o'clock. The views expressed on this program are not necessarily those of the SABC or Rights and Recourse. From all of us in the studio, thank you to our guests and good afternoon.